Hey, if you're an artist or a producer recording vocals on your own and you're struggling with processing your vocals after you record them, today I'm going to be your guide to getting a pro vocal sound using only free stock plugins. My name is Taylor Webb, and I've spent the last 15 years as a producer, mixer, and mastering engineer. I've worked with major labels, major publishers, and I'm in the top 1% most streamed mixing and mastering engineers in the world. All right, here we go. Let's dive into some vocal processing. Okay, so here's a really great example of somebody who had a really vibey track, but they're just kind of struggling to get their vocals to sit in it the way they wanted. This is from an artist named Z Legacy, and the song's called Paradise. I'm just gonna play the track as he had it with his processing on it.
Paradise got me floating through the night. It ain't fake as I can't turn away with locking eyes. I don't get a lie. So many feels I can't deny. If you dare to try.
You know, this is like a vibey track. It's cool. It's got that like modern R&B pop thing. And I actually really like some of the like vocal effects choices he made with his voice. I think they're really cool and they fit the song. But I think the actual processing on the vocal, the basic EQ and compression could both use some work. So what we want to do is get him that really like upfront, compressed pop, R&B vocal sound without pushing it into the realm of anything that feels or sounds unnatural. Here is what his voice sounds like completely raw just over the track.
Paradise got me floating through the night. It ain't fake as I can't turn away, we locking eyes. I don't get a lie.
So that's actually like a really nice sounding raw recording. There's not like a ton of bad room noise or like artifacts. It just needs some work to get it to where we want to go. So I'm going to show you how to do that with all stock plugins. So if you have a DAW, you can do this on your own. The goal here is to get it sounding good while we're working on the song and, producing the rest of the song. But we also want to leave extra room for more processing to go on the vocal if we're going to hand it off to like a mix engineer. Okay, so the first thing we're going to start with is an EQ, and we're going to kind of call this the cleanup EQ. And before we get into any sort of like compression or saturation or any of these other vocal processes, what we want to do is we want to make sure we're addressing any major issues in the track. So the first thing we're going to do is if you just press play with the analyzer on, you're going to see that there's times where his vocal has this like big bump.
Paradise.
We're probably not going to hear that when it's playing back, but your speaker doesn't care if you can hear it or not. If it's there, it's going to try and play it back. So we just want to get that out of the way, and we're going to do that with a low cut, just like this. And I'm not cutting any of the actual low frequencies in his voice. Like, look at the meters again.
Paradise got me floating through the night.
So like the lowest parts of his voice, I'm not even touching that. I'm just getting rid of the noise. The next thing I want to do is I just want to work in with these shelves. Shelves are great because they have this really natural, gentle curve to them. They're one of the most like natural ways you can EQ something. And I think that if you can kind of correct a sound or get it closer to the way you want it by just using a shelf, you're going to get a lot better result than if you're to like use a bell and like pull this up and then cut over here and then like make it narrow. This is going to sound more unnatural. If you can, you just want to stick to shelves first and see how close you can get to what you want. The two moves that I'm making here, one is just a low shelf, just 2 dB, and I'm just trying to get the lowest frequencies in his voice to sit back a little bit. And then over here on the high shelf, we're doing a 4 dB boost starting at 1K. So really just all of the upper mid-range and top frequencies. We're just kind of tilting the vocal to already like point it towards more brightness without doing any like really weird cuts or like giant boosts. So this is what that sounds like.
Paradise got me floating through the night. It ain't fake as I can't turn away, we locking eyes. I don't get a lie. So many feels I can't deny. If you dare to try.
So you can already start to feel it sit on top of the track a little more. We're getting a little more clarity in the words, and we're already headed in the right direction. And this is going to set us up for our compressors. So your first compressor we're going to pull up, we're going to start like this, and this is going to be our fast compressor. So that means we want it to grab any of the like really big peaks in the audio really fast, but then also we want it to let go fast so it gets out of the way. And when we set this up to do that, we're going to get a vocal that just gets smoothed out and more even for the rest of our processing chain. So when you pull up the stock compressor in Logic, the first thing you're going to have to do is turn off auto gain, and you want to turn off auto release. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to set your attack to pretty fast. And then I did a really fast release too. You're going to want to set your ratio to 4:1. That's just kind of a good medium amount for a ratio. Depending on your genre, if it's a more chill genre, you might want to end up down here. You know, if you're trying to do something really aggressive, you might want to go up here. But I would say if you're a beginner, just start here, right in the middle. And what you're going to do is while your vocal is playing, you're going to start with your threshold at 0, like that, all the way to the right. And then you're just going to pull the threshold down until you're doing like about 4 or 5 dB of compression on like the loud peaks of your vocal. So it doesn't need to be going all the time. And then you're also going to turn up your makeup gain the same 4 or 5 dB. So I'm going to turn this off and on. There's going to be a level jump when it's on, but that's okay. Don't worry about it.
Paradise got me floating through the night. It ain't fake as I can't turn away. We locking eyes. I don't get a lie. So many feels I can't deny.
Okay, so we're already getting a much more even response through the song, and we can hear the words he's saying a lot better. So we're going to pull up our second compressor. This is going to be our slow compressor. Don't forget to turn off your auto gain, your auto release. For attack and release on this, you just want to go slower than the first one on the attack. And then for the release, I went way slower. So this is going to be, you know, when people throw words around like glue or like gooey or any of that stuff, it usually means a slow release on a compressor. And this is just going to give it a really nice, smooth, even response. We're going to do 4:1 again. Same thing. You're going to pull the threshold down until you're doing, you know, around 4 or 5 dB, maybe more.
Paradise got me floating through the night. It ain't fake as I can't turn away. We locking eyes.
So as we're compressing more, we're also going to be bringing up the sound of his S's and his sibilants, and we just want to make sure we control that, especially because we still want to get this brighter and have a little more air. We're going to do wide. You're going to click shelf for the filter. And then for the frequency, when we select this, everything from here and up is going to trigger the de-esser. So we're telling it where to look for the S sounds. You know, we can go all the way down here, but really most vocals, it starts to become a problem up here and beyond. One of my favorite things to do on a de-esser is to have a control like this with the max reduction. So this means that even if it thinks it needs to go over this amount of de-essing, it's not going to let itself do that. And then just like we did with the other compressors, we're just going to pull this threshold down until just the strongest S sounds are triggering it. For the reduction, I kind of recommend anywhere between like 2 and 4, depending on how aggressive you want to be with it.
Paradise got me floating through the night. It ain't fake as I can't turn away. We locking eyes.
So now that we've got that controlled and the overall dynamic range is more controlled and more focused, we get to add the vibe EQ or like the color EQ. And this is where you're going to really like boost up the frequency ranges that you want to highlight, but they're going to sound better now because you've controlled the vocal. You've cleaned it up, you've controlled it, and now we're going to emphasize the cool stuff. So this is Logic's stock vintage tube EQ. It's based on a Pultec EQ. There's like some unique stuff about this piece of hardware that it's emulating, but the only thing you need to know really is that these lows and highs have a very like wide curve to them. So just like we were talking about with shelves earlier, the wider it is, the more like natural and musical it's going to sound. So you can get away with a bigger boost without it really being artificial sounding. The other thing is it's going to have some built-in saturation, which is going to sound nice. So I kind of created an approximation of what the curves of this EQ look like on a regular EQ because it's doing multiple things at once, right? The low boost, even though we're targeting 60 on this particular piece of gear, the actual boost itself is really wide and gentle like this. And then the low attenuation is just like a dip that is usually a little bit above. So there's kind of this overlap like this. And then with the high frequencies, we have the high bandwidth all the way up to make it really wide, and it's set at 16K. So it's going to look kind of like this. But this is what it's going to sound like. I'll turn it off and on.
Paradise got me floating through the night. It ain't fake as I can't turn away. We locking eyes. I don't get a lie. So many feels I can't deny. If you dare to try, Turn a small moment to a lifetime.
All right, so now we're really starting to get that like cool airiness, but we're also getting like some of the warmth in his vocal, and it's nice because it's controlled. It's not making things muddy. The other thing you want to remember is when you're adjusting this EQ, and really most of these adjustments, you don't want to stay in solo for too long. Something can sound good on an EQ or a compressor in solo, and then when you try and mix it in with the track, it sounds terrible. So I like to make these EQ boosts while I'm listening to it mixed into the track, because then I know where I'm boosting is actually enhancing the placement of it in the song. Okay, so now that we've got this as kind of a starting setup point, let's just take a quick comparison. I'm going to try to level match it, but this is going to be more consistently loud, and this is kind of going to be loud and quiet and loud and quiet. But let's listen compared to the raw vocal.
Paradise got me floating through the night. It ain't fair 'cause I can't turn away, we locking eyes. Paradise got me floating through the night. It ain't fair 'cause I can't turn away, we locking eyes.
So that's, I mean, a huge difference. It still is sounding like more natural than where we started with his processing, but we're getting like way more even response. We're getting excitement from the compression. We're getting control. We're getting excitement from the EQ, and it's going to be a lot closer to where the end goal is for kind of this vibe we're going for. Let's compare it real quick to the original.
Paradise got me floating through the night. It ain't fair 'cause Paradise got me floating through the night. It ain't fair 'cause
It's a pretty big leap forward, but it's still going to leave you with plenty of room to do processing later, or for a mix engineer to do processing later. Also, just a quick reminder, this is designed to just kind of be a basic starting point. You're going to need to change it based on your voice, on your vocal recording, the mic you use, the genre, how much compression you want. But this is just a good way to get started and to kind of understand the concepts of processing a vocal. All right, that's it for this time. If this is helpful, please let me know and do the things like, give me a like, give me a share, give me a comment, send it to your friend, tell them this is why their vocals sound terrible, just the stuff. Also, I'm going to try to do stuff like this more and more often. I'm teaching myself to do it right now. So if you have ideas for things that you wish you could learn, that you feel like there aren't good resources for online, just anything that would be helpful. It really helps me to know what is actually helpful, because it takes time to do this. So I don't want it to be a waste. Let me know. All right. See ya.